Wigan win at Bolton while Bristol Rovers sack Matt Taylor and Burton Albion's search for a new manager goes on. Welcome to the League One Lowdown. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Deck Podcast Network, the League One Lowdown, the review episode with myself, Jamie Johnson, and as always, Seb Jones. Seb, how are you?
Very good, thank you, Jamie. A little bit cold, but how are you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm all right. Well, I've just noticed, for video viewers, I've obviously changed locations. For people who listen to the podcast, they'll be thinking, what's he on about? But I'm at home now, back from university, and I have just noticed I've got a fan behind me, which is very much not getting any use because it is very, very cold this time of year. But we're a day late, obviously, so apologies for that. But there is good reason for being a day late, Seb, because we, for a change, rather than meeting virtually, we met in person yesterday.
Yeah, we were a day late. It's all your fault, Jamie. Yes, no, we did.
It is my fault, actually.
Well, it is your fault. Yeah. Yeah, we did. We met up in person yesterday in the good old land of Sheffield, which is where I am currently at university. And you were watching the wrestling, weren't you?
Yeah,
you're watching. You've got your own wrestling podcast on the deck, and he thought he'd take it one step further and go and watch some wrestling in Sheffield. So, what better time to meet up with your fellow podcast partner than yesterday? So we had a bit of an in-person meet up rather than a virtual meet up on our regular Sunday slot. Hence why we are slightly late to you, but blame Jamie. Yeah.
We're still here. That's all that matters. And I mean, you're doing my own plugs for me now, Seb. The Pure Vision podcast is my wrestling podcast here on the deck. So if that takes your fancy, it's wherever you find this podcast. But we have a little bit to talk about today. We're going to go in detail on 3 matches from Saturday, and then in the second half, do something a little bit different and talk really the news note with Burton still searching for a manager. And there's a very interesting stat to bring out there. And then the big news, which came out this morning. So it's a good job we delayed the podcast.
Well, of course,
because the news would have broken just as we published that Matt Taylor has left Bristol Rovers. So we're going to talk about that in the second half, but we'll start with what I mentioned in the intro, which was Wigan Athletic and their win at Bolton. Derby Day defeat for Bolton, and it's a 5th loss in 6 games in terms of derbies. It's a bit of a mess at Bolton. What do you make to the game itself?
It is. Well, I see. Funny you sort of approach it from a Burton sort of perspective. Where I looked at this more, when I saw the result come through, more as from a Wigan point of view, really, in terms of they've not had the best season so far. They've had a couple of good victories, but in the end, to beat your rivals, keep a clean sheet in there as well. I think the result is very good for Wigan, really, rather than very bad for Bolton. Wigan, as table was ahead of it, were sort of in that mid to low end of the table. The result now takes them to 16th, so they're above Rotherham, albeit on the same points, but the goal difference is in between that. And if someone had said he was a Wigan fan, that at this point in the season you'd be above Rotherham, I think they'd have snapped my hand off it. Albeit the circumstances of Rotherham are slightly different. But yeah, I think it was a solid performance. Othello Asgard on the score sheet yet again. He's proved pretty pivotal for Wigan so far this season, and Taylor as well. Striker, sort of the central figure up top for the Latics on the score sheet. Also, his shot from 12 yards gave the away side the lead in the derby. But yeah, ultimately, I think praise Wigan, really, a clean sheet away from home to go to your rivals. 2 top quality players on the score sheet. I think, Sean Maloney will be very, very impressed with the result. Less can be said probably for Ian Everett, really.
Yeah, I mean, rightfully so in terms of Wigan, and I think it's important and good that you bring out that first before going into the negative side of the game in a Bolton perspective. And like you mentioned yourself, goals either time of half time. Taylor and Asgard and Wigan continue their good run of form against Bolton, and they dominated it really, just under, I beg your pardon, 25,000 in the ground, and they dominated on every stat except possession. Wigan, and possession, it doesn't mean anything if you don't do anything with it. And Wigan made the most of the little relatively possession they had, and they did really well in this game. And yeah, really fantastic win, and that is important. But the other side of it, as you mentioned, in terms of Ian Evatt, Bolton continue their struggles against their rivals. They're not on a bad run of form in all competitions, but against Wigan, they have not beaten them since 2015. It's 8 games without victory over Wigan, and they dropped down to 8th. Games in hand, admittedly, but they've slipped out of the playoffs. But it's not panic stations, I would say. So, what do you think on that? It's not, I guess the way I look at it, it's not awful in terms of the league position, but they've dropped out of the playoffs, and that's never a good thing.
No, not at all. It was they were booed off at half time. It's probably the best way to put it. The fans are probably a little bit annoyed with the inconsistency, and that's what it is. Results like that, history like that, stretching back all the way back to 2015, is poor. It's one of those that you just have these bogey sides really, and ultimately, like, Wigan are just one of Bolton's bogey sides. That obviously doesn't explain fully why they got 3 points, but probably part of that, really. Like I said, they were booed off at half time. It was 1-0, and it probably could have been more as well. There's a couple of chances that the keeper did well. The Bolton keeper did well. That is Baxter in between the sticks for the home side. So, yeah, it's not a good result. It's a bad result for Bolton, but it's really not the end of the world. They are still in a good, solid position. 8th, only 1 point off the playoff positions, which is not bad going at all, really, considering the slump that they did have earlier on this season, where Everett's head really was being called for. In the end, sort of the board have proved pretty patient with him, and I think they're slowly reaping the rewards for that. I guess results like this Saturday, the questions come out again, really, but I think overall, I think they are sort of, they're showing that they did a good job to stick with him when he was under so much pressure when he was. So, yes, I don't think it's panic stations at the minute for Bolton, for sure.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Managers and teams always have bad runs, don't they? And there is no... you look at Manchester City in the Premier League now, they're on an awful run of form, 1 win in 11, something like that.
Oh, yeah.
It happens to everybody, even the best teams, and Bolton obviously had that early on in the season, but they are picking up for the most part. This is a blip for me, but really good for Wigan, really important for them. It ends a run of 3 losses in a row, all competitions, which is obviously a real positive, and to do it away from home, keep a clean sheet, there isn't a bad thing you can look at from that one, from a Wigan perspective. But we'll head on over to Wrexham against Cambridge. That's one of the other games we're going to talk about in more detail. 2-2 there at the racecourse ground. And for me, Seb, I guess before we go in detail on the actual game itself, one of the shocks of the weekend in League One.
Yeah, I would agree, really. I guess from the outside, you'd sort of back your horse on Wrexham just absolutely dominating this one in terms of results-wise. That was, but clearly not to be the case. In fact, Cambridge took the lead through Elias Kachunga on 20, and then 7 minutes later, the equaliser from McLean. So, the Cambridge obviously come out with some force and some a bit of attitude and a little bit about them, really. Facing the big wigs that are Wrexham in the League One, and in the end, it was a last-minute penalty from Lunderloo that secured the equaliser and secured the points really away from home for Cambridge. As you said, massive surprise results wise, but you can't complain. When you do sort of try and match a side like Wrexham, actually Cambridge had more touches in the box than Wrexham did. They had more corners as well than Wrexham did. So ultimately you are giving yourself more chances. Yes, I had less possession, but ultimately you don't, especially against teams like Wrexham, we don't need the possession. It's what you do with the ball that really matters. And ultimately they delivered. 2 goals against Wrexham, securing a point. More sides will go to the racecourse and get worse results. That is for sure. So a solid point, I think, for Cambridge, definitely.
Yeah, it's a fantastic point for Cambridge. On my notes, I put huge win. Obviously, it was a draw, but it feels like a
Felt like,
win
yeah.
for Cambridge, really, that picking up a point at Wrexham. And you mentioned the fact that they scored 2 goals. It's only the second time this season they've conceded 2 at home, Wrexham. The other time, a 3-2 win on the opening day against Wickham. And it looks a fantastic point from every angle you look at it. I mean, Cambridge obviously struggling down in the relegation zone, and any point's a good point. But to do it against Wrexham and importantly at Wrexham, who are so unbelievably strong at home, only the second time this season they've dropped points, and it's only the third time Cambridge have claimed points away from home. So Cambridge poor away. I mean, they've been poor at home as well, but Cambridge poor away from home. Wrexham incredibly good at home, and they've turned that round a little bit, Cambridge, in this one. And yeah, you mentioned the penalty, 89th minute to seal it in a game that looked pretty even. It's not like it's a smash and grab because it looked on the stats like it was a pretty even game.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And, even game is what we got in the even score, 2 apiece. Nothing much to separate the two sides. Yes, Cambridge got the penalty to ultimately seal the point, but yeah, nothing too much to tell the two sides apart, which I think will definitely please Cambridge. And Phil Parkinson will be definitely disappointed. He said post-match that the goals, particularly the first one, were too easy. His side conceded it was too easy to concede that first goal. And he said that once his side went ahead, which they did, they went 2-1 ahead. They side enough to seal the game, and ultimately they could have gone to kill the game off. Was his words, but not to be the case because they conceded the last minute penalty. So yeah, it's one of those where one side is happy and one side just isn't. But in the end, point of peace, can't complain too much.
Well, that's it. It's not a defeat, and it retains that unbeaten home record for Wrexham. The only other time they haven't won at home this season in the league, back in October, a goalless draw against Huddersfield. So they're still unbeaten at home. Obviously, they were disappointing point for them, but for Cambridge, a really impressive point and a really strong performance. So all credit goes to Cambridge and Gary Monk on that account. And then we'll move along then to our third and final of the games we're going to pick out in real detail. That Reading 0, Blackpool 3. Seb, this one took me a little bit by surprise as well, actually. But perhaps it shouldn't have done because Blackpool, under the radar, are steadily climbing the table. 3 league wins in a row, all away from home, and a strong performance here.
Yeah, and probably the biggest surprise, Ashley Fletcher on the score sheet. Yes. Let's come up with that one. I hope you like that. Yeah, okay. Yeah, definitely big surprise in terms of the result. Reading have been flying so far this season. Is 6th in the table currently, but obviously rumours tell us that the old manager has just gone to Hull City. Noel Hunt taken charge, yet to get his first win, and evidently not to be against a tough Blackpool side that were 2-0 up after half time, and it's just an uphill battle from there, really. Managed to get third through Fletcher in the second half. So, yeah, Blackpool are slowly climbing the stage up to 10th now. A couple of points off Lincoln and 4 points off Bolton in 8th and Barnsley in 7th as well. So, looking good for Blackpool. I'd be concerned for Reading, but I think, as we discussed last week, I don't think it's a massive concern because I always thought they were sort of over punching and over, just overstepping where they should be, overachieving. That's I'm trying to think of the word there. Yeah, overachieving. So I don't think it's a massive disappointment to. Obviously, it's a big disappointment to lose, but in terms of what it does for the bigger picture, yes, we're still in the top 6. But I think being in the top 6 is always overachieving for Reading. So I think it'll only be a matter of time before they slowly slide down the table. Not too far, of course. But still looking for his first win, Noel Hunt. I guess you do question, is he the right man to take over? We had this debate last week. We couldn't really come to a conclusive argument. But yeah, not to be at home for Reading on Saturday. Yeah, 3-0. Defeat to Blackpool. 3 different goal scorers for Blackpool as well: Morgan, Apter, and Fletcher, who I sort of joked about. But 2 assists from Carl Joseph, the first and the final one. both from Kyle Joseph. So, everyone's pulling their weight a little bit at the forward line. Joseph and Fletcher started as that front two, so they're sort of both starting to adapt to one of the wingers as well. So, all the attacking players are starting to come into a little bit of form for Blackpool. I'm not getting too carried away, but, bearing in mind my rants on previous episodes about Blackpool's attack, I'm not getting too carried away, but they are all showing a little bit of quality when probably they need it after a bit of a rough spell at the club.
Yeah. It was they was on a poor run of form, admittedly, and they were really struggling. Just couldn't seem to buy a win, and suddenly they're on a really good run of form. As I say, 3 wins in a row in the league, and what I put in my notes, and it's just how it felt to me that it's a Ruben Sellers like missing Reading, like a Ruben Sellers-less Reading. Like you can tell he's not there. This a disappointing one. I think maybe not, because I know we talked about it last week, and it's difficult to sort of put a finger on it because, I mean, I think, as we talked about last week, that Hunt is going to be a good appointment in the long run in terms of that keeping that foundation, that solidity at the club that really, really needs it. But they are going to slide, I think, down to mid-table and perhaps further. But I don't see them falling into any issues, as we talked about last week. But in this one, Blackpool outperformed them, really. 15 shots, 8 on target to 10 and 2 on target for Reading. So they were outshot, outperformed by Blackpool, I beg your pardon, and a 3-0 win to match, really well deserved. And for Reading, I guess the last point before we move to our half-time break, if you like, is that Reading have Lincoln next, away from home on Saturday, one of the early kickoffs. And that, for me, is a really interesting one. Obviously, I guess a bit more because I'm a bit more attached to Lincoln. It's one of the teams I cover. But I think that game's interesting because they're not an easy team to beat. And they're not an easy team to beat at the minute with how they're playing, even if they are flappable, I guess is the right word for it.
Yeah.
They were really poor against Rotherham. A couple of crosses in the box, can't deal with a corner. Sean Raggett doing Sean Raggett things from a corner. It's just an easy goal in that game. And since then, a draw to Charlton, and they threw away a 2-goal lead against Huddersfield this weekend just gone. So I don't think it's the best game they could have got in terms of being a halter slide, which is Reading seem to be on the sliding their way down the table, and they need to halt it quick before they slide too far. But again, on the other side of it, don't think it is the worst game they could get a Lincoln team who are, definitely beatable. And if Reading are on it, Reading can beat them. But are Reading going to be on it? I'm not convinced.
Well, that's a big question, Jamie. That's a big question, and that's why that's what basically why Noel. It's an opportunity for Noel Hunt to start proving himself a little bit, because the last couple of games, just results wise, haven't fallen for him, and he needs a couple of results to, I guess, sort of prove his appointment and prove the decision from the Reading hierarchy, and a tough game there, as you said.
Yeah, definitely that. Well, before we head to a break, it's just worth pointing out that probably tomorrow, as you listen to this, on Wednesday night at 8 p.m, we're having a live stream on YouTube. Myself, Seb, and then Callum and Sam from the preview podcast as well. So all 4 of us together for a pre-Christmas festive special. A couple of drinks we'll be having. So do feel like joining us and have a couple of drinks yourself, maybe, as we listen on. We're going to do a bit of a pub quiz, answering some questions and going through every team in the division. So there'll be lots of fun had Wednesday night. So do join us for that. And we're going to head for a quick break. And when we come back, talk about Matt Taylor leaving Bristol Rovers. Welcome back then to the League One Lowdown here on the Deck Podcast Network. I'm Jamie Johnson, and joined by, as always, Seb Jones. We'll have a quick run through of the other games from the weekend. It was goalless between Burton Albion and Leyton Orient, and managerless Burton, as we will get on to later on. And it was also goalless between Charlton Athletic and Mansfield Town, as Charlton remained toothless up front, and Mansfield now 7 without a win in League One. So trouble perhaps there for Nigel Clough and his team. Barnsley, you'll be happy, Seb, a 2-1 win on the road at Exeter City. Second half comeback there for Barnsley. Go on. I'll let you have a word on that. We feel like we always talk about Barnsley when they lose, but they picked up a win on Saturday.
They did a pretty solid win, to be fair. They came out second half much better. First half, they were really poor. Just lead from McGuinness, and second half, Darryl Clark clearly had words with them. Things were starting to click a lot more. The ball was passed. I think it's for the winning goal. Well, what was to be the winning goal to make it 2-1. There's about 3-4 passes that took it straight from halfway through Barnes' half into Exeter's box. So, just sort of that quick move, evidently on display. And Kelechi Nwakali, his first goal for the club with a good start from distance, and then Davis Gilly done with the second for the Reds. Yeah, so much better second half performance than first, and clearly something to celebrate for the fans that made a long journey down.
Fantastic. And Lincoln, for the not as long a journey, but the fans that made the trip to Huddersfield, 2-0 up, Ben Howson, Bailey Cadamartri, the latter with 2 in 2 games, and they squandered a 2-goal lead. It finished 2-2 in the end. Disappointing for Lincoln, that going 2-0 up and not claiming all 3 points. 7-goal thriller at Peterborough United. Eventually, though, 4-3 in their favour against Crawley Town. Kean Hayes with the winner in that one. Rotherham, a brace for Johnson Clark Harris, back on the right foot is how I describe Rotherham. A 3-0 win for them against Northampton Town. Wickham, 4-1 winners at Gareth Ainsworth's Shrewsbury Town. His old team coming back to haunt him. Definitely in that one, top versus bottom. Cambridge, I beg your pardon, I don't know where Cambridge came from. Stevenage, nowhere near
Cambridge. Chatting about Cambridge,
I know we've yeah, exactly. Stevenage 2, Stockport County 1. Another shock of the weekend. Perhaps that's why it was in my mind. Obviously, Cambridge a shock. We talked about earlier on that, another one. And finally, Birmingham City 2, Bristol Rovers 0 in what proved to be Matt Taylor's final match. And we'll go there now. Matt Taylor, no longer the manager at Bristol Rovers. They sit 20th in the table, 2 clear of relegation, and just 6 wins out of their 19 in League One so far this season. We'll speculate, throw our picks into the rumour mill in a couple of minutes. But Seb, what do you make to Matt Taylor leaving his post at Bristol Rovers?
Well, I look at this at two sides. I look at it in terms of results haven't been good enough. League table place isn't good enough. Therefore, his position isn't good enough. Hence why he's been sacked. I also look at this as it's a man that's only been there less than a year. Well, just over a year. Appointed the 1st of December last year on a 3.5-year deal. So 10 wins while he was there last year. Kept the club up in League One. Kept them to safety. Finished 15th. Solid finish for Bristol Rovers. This season, currently 20th. 21 points on board, 2 places off the relegation places, and 3, in what is quite tight above that relegation zone. 2 or 3 clubs around that area. I think it's a bit harsh on him, really, given sort of he's been there before. Has he been there before? No, he hasn't been. He has been there before, hasn't he? He's not been there before. Ignore that.
Ex-Rotherham, wasn't he? He came in from Rotherham.
Yeah, and then he was at Exeter before. Ignore what I said. He was at Exeter. I do think it's a bit harsh, but ultimately it's a results-based business. He's been there less than a year. Results haven't been good enough, really, particularly in the last few weeks. Really, just winning 6 of the 18 games this season before he was sacked. It's not good enough form, really. He said actually in an interview just a few days before he was sacked that he did fear for his job after the poor run, and ultimately 2 days later he was sacked. He said that the confidence is, quoting this is what he said before he got sacked. Quote: "Confidence is a big factor, and you can't head away from it. So you need the ones who will stand up and be counted for. It's my team and results that haven't been good enough. The players are coming back, but something has to change in our direction." So I think that's a slight hint to obviously some of the injury troubles that they've had. Is he sort of not blaming them, but using those as a bit of an excuse, really? It's not really good excuse because everyone has injuries. Everyone's got to get through them somehow. But yeah, Yeah, I'm a bit in the middle about this because I fear, the work we've seen, when he kept Rotherham up in the Championship, when he was at Exeter before, good solid manager. And I don't think Bristol Rovers are in that deep of a trouble. Like I said, there's a lot of sort of players, a lot of teams, I beg your pardon, in and around the places above the relegation zone, and Bristol Rovers are one of them. So I think, I'm not. It doesn't quite sit right with me, but I can see why it's been made the decision.
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean. I think it's one of those where, you mentioned yourself with what Matt Taylor was saying, is that something's got to give, and the easiest thing to do is sack your manager. And obviously that is the sort of the card that was played in this scenario. I've seen what seems like quite a lot. I mean, you get a real microcosm online in terms of a fan base, but it seems like from at least the fans who are active on social media that this was expected and perhaps wanted in a way. Obviously, we've seen it from the outside, and you look at it and you go, yes, it's a bad run of form, really bad run of form. Only one win in the last 7. They've got the worst goal difference in the league, aside from the teams in the bottom 4. But you look at it and go, it's Bristol Rovers. They should be higher than they are, but they shouldn't be that much higher. If no disrespect to Bristol Rovers, but they're a mid-table League One team. The 20th, they're far off mid-table, but it's not panic stations just yet. So I think you look at it with a bit of distance and you go, yeah, it's probably a bit harsh. But if you're a Bristol Rovers fan, if you're in and around the club, you're looking at it, and obviously you have a much more emotional connection to it, and you're thinking, we need to turn this around quickly before we're pulled into some sort of issue down the bottom of the table, because they're only a couple of points clear of relegation, as we mentioned earlier. So they're in that mix, and Bristol Rovers shouldn't be in that mix at the bottom of the table. So I understand why it's been made. I think it looks harsher because his last game was against Birmingham City. If he lost to Shrewsbury, we talked about earlier on, then you're going, yeah, that makes sense. The fact that it's Birmingham City, I think, to be honest, makes it look harsher than it is. The time had sort of come, is how I look at it, and seems to be at least the online consensus within Bristol Rovers that they're supporters. The interims, though, are David Horseman and former Sunderland man Lee Cattermole, who only came in a few days ago. That is one of the other interesting wrinkles in this story, that Lee Cattermole came in a couple of days ago, and he's almost immediately part of the interim coaching staff. If that means he's going to be in the frame for the manager's job, I'm not sure. And that's where we'll go next in terms of, we've talked about Matt Taylor leaving. Well, who's coming in? There are a lot of names in the rumour mill, as there always is, I beg your pardon. Gary Rowett out of work. He's an option that's been thrown around. Des Buckingham's just been sacked by Oxford United. Obviously, got them up through the playoffs to the Championship last year. He's just left his job. And the name that perhaps is the wackiest, if you like, at least on surface, is Aitor Karanka, which I laugh saying because it seems crazy. His most recent job, Maccabi Tel Aviv, left there in summer of 2023. Obviously, they're a European Cup side now. Are they? They're even in the Conference League or the Europa League anyway. So they're a top-level European side in terms of that sort of circuit. But the reason he's been linked to it is because Middlesbrough links. George Friend, former Doncaster Rovers, of course, is Bristol Rovers' director of football. And there are those Middlesbrough links to Karanka, former Birmingham, Notts Forest, and of course Middlesbrough, as I mentioned. So they're a selection of the names thrown into the ring. So those 3, and obviously Lee Cattermole's another one that's been chucked into this mix. I'm going to put you on the spot, Seb. This is the good thing about me leading the ship this week, is I get to put you on the spot rather than the other way around, and ask you who you think is going to get the Bristol Rovers job.
Not Aitor Karanka would be my. It's probably the easiest. I can't think of many players that will come in. Sorry, not many players, managers that will come in. They basically just need someone that's a survival expert, really. And here's another plug. I guess maybe someone you might have spoken to on this podcast a few months ago. Maybe I don't know if it go there really, but
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. So we've plugged a couple of things already, but I'll plug another one. That Dino Manria interview, obviously, we did probably about a month and a half ago now. And he's looking for a project, isn't he? That's what he said to us in that interview, that he wants a project club, even if he is sort of seen as a firefighter, seen as a survival escape artist, if you like, that he wants a project, perhaps Bristol Rovers, get there in the end, is that project for him, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's always hard, really, because there's only so many type of managers that want to go to these sort of places. And Bristol Rovers, like I said, I think did really well to finish in 15th last season under Matt Taylor. And other than that, there just isn't really. I don't know. They can't really. The ambitions of the club, I don't think, are very much higher. From my point of view, I think 15th is probably the highest that they can / will go, really. So it's about sort of a manager coming in that's happy to be fighting at the bottom end of the table, really. I don't know if there's a manager from League Two that wants a bit of a challenge in the bottom half of League One, maybe, rather than challenging. Yeah, probably Dino Manria, or if Jimmy Floyd has to wants to get back into managing, maybe. We've seen Burton, similar sort of challenge, in League One. I don't know. I think I'm just naming ex-Burton players, managers here, really. But
it seems to be.
Matt
Robinson as well is going to be the next one.
Yeah, I just can't think of. No, it's not one where really any names stick out for me. Sometimes you get sackings where you think, right, so and so is going to come in, or he's been in. He used to play for them, and he was doing coaching badges and whatnot. There's no real names for me in terms of Bristol Rovers. There's no real names that really stand out as being the number one candidate and the number one target. So yeah, it's just going to sound like a really cop-out answer, but I think they'll just leave it to the two interims for probably until the new year. Is what I would say.
See how they get on. I mean, if the interims do well, Lee Cattermole, he seems to be someone who wants to get into coaching. Obviously, got this gig now at Bristol Rovers. Perhaps if they do well, that's the direction they'll go in terms of making the interim permanent. I think Dino is an interesting name to throw in there.
Yeah.
Ata Karanka, you just look at it on the surface, it sounds insane. That he dropped down to the bottom of League One. There are those links, obviously, with George Friend, and that seems to be why his name has been mentioned. There don't seem to be any other reason for it other than those links, those Middlesbrough links, as we've mentioned. BBC Radio Bristol did a bit of a piece on it, a video that was on a BBC News article I watched earlier on, and that was one of the names they mentioned, and they sort of floated around the names that are always around these sort of jobs. Gary Rowett, I think, is an interesting one. He's out of work. He's doing a lot of punditry these days. So does he want to go back into management? I don't know. Robbie Savage is another one who's been linked to a few jobs. He was linked to Northampton Town, obviously currently Macclesfield manager in the Northern Premier League, Step 7. So it would be a real jump if he was to step up to the third tier. There are lots of names floating around. So it'd be interesting to see where it lands. And we'll have a clearer picture in, dare I say, a couple of days. Perhaps this should be something we talk about in more detail on Wednesday night, to plug that 8 p.m. YouTube live stream once more.
Here we go again.
We might have a better picture come Wednesday because it's very fresh. Obviously, time of recording, it was this morning. The sacking or dismissal, if you like, was made of Matt Taylor. So we'll keep our eyes peeled, I guess, is what you'd say, isn't it? And we'll wait and see on that. Not to also avoid the question like you, but in terms of just sticking a name on it and going for it, because I can then look back in a couple of weeks and go, I told you so. I'll go for Gary Rowett, and that'll be the name I pegged to it. You went for Dino. Are you going for Dino? Is that going to be the name
let's lock him in. Yeah.
Sam will be delighted because Sam can get some social media content out of that, can't he? So Sam will be very happy over on the preview podcast. But yes, we'll wait and see, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, as we go forward. And the other place, the final place we're going to cover this week, is Burton Albion, who are also without a manager. Interim Tom Hounsell's been in for well over a month. There are some there's some news, some reporting in terms of someone that was talked to and has turned them down, which I'll throw to you on. But I just want to say one stat before we get to that, which is the one I alluded to earlier, which was from Edward Walker on Twitter. Hounsell, an interim manager, is the 79th longest serving in the 92, which is just staggering, really.
Yeah, and what is he? I think it's just he's coming up to just over a month, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just over a month, yeah.
Second season well and truly underway.
Well, yeah, we saw 4 within space of, not just League One, but 4 within the 92 yesterday. Just bizarre. Well, just bizarre, really. And then, as you said, talk Matt Taylor this morning as well. So, in terms of you mentioned there, in terms of the interest that the Burton had, it was the Crew Alexander boss Lee Bell that it's rumoured that he's been approached, but actually the club, Crew Alexander, that is, released a statement saying that Bell was committed to
he reaffirmed
sticking with the
commitment.
challenge. Yeah, sticking with the challenge of Crew Alexander. They're doing pretty well in League Two, so it's one of those where yes, you fought flying high in League Two, but would you fancy come to the lower end of League One? Well, evidently not is the answer to that question. So he
obviously fancies, not to interrupt you just on that point, he obviously fancies getting them up. They got into the playoff final last season, lost out to Crawley, obviously. He obviously thinks he's got a chance of getting them up this season, and there's no reason why he can't. They're up at the top end of League Two, and it's a step. It's sideways for me. Obviously, it's a division up into League One, but top of League Two, bottom of League One. I don't think that's a big jump for a manager, and I think it makes sense that he has reportedly said no to the approach. Obviously, you put 2 and 2 together, don't you? Easily with that, with Crew putting out the statement that he's reaffirmed his commitment, and a club has approached and he said no, and then all the reporting that he was in the frame for the Burton job. You just put 2 and 2 together without it being confirmed explicitly. But I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, well, exactly that, really. Where did Burton go from here, really? Because, it's been over a month now without a manager. Tom Hounsell still in as interim charge, but Burton still without a permanent manager. So it does, going into not far now from the January transfer window, it's always a little bit awkward when there's never quite that sort of man in charge, if you like, at clubs. And Tom Hounsell clearly is the man in charge, but only on a temporary basis at the moment. Whether that becomes a little bit, we've seen sometimes that clubs might extend an interim manager to the end of the season. We've not yet seen that with Burton Albion. So it will be interesting to see what happens. That stat that you mentioned, very interesting, but I guess it sort of just reaffirms what sort of job we live in, and this day and age in terms of football sackings and managers not doing their jobs, etc. They're a bit stuck in a bit of a sticky situation, Burton. Really, there's not a lot they can do. The results haven't been good enough. Yes, there's been a few good performances within there, but on the whole, not been the greatest under Tom Hounsell.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you just can't really make too much sense of it, because they obviously had a bit of injection of cash in the summer, a real overhaul of the squad, and it didn't work. The manager that led this, obviously a fresh manager, Chelsea Academy, Mark Robinson, coming up his first proper job in the EFL, a real overhaul, as I mentioned, of the squad, and he didn't last 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And perhaps it just doesn't look appealing that you have a manager like that who is given this remit in the summer. The squad's turned on its head, and then he's sacked quite early on. Obviously, they were doing awfully, it has to be said, and you understand the sacking, and probably was, in this climate, like you mentioned, the right decision. And it's those decisions that are always made because someone's head has to roll in those situations, and it's often and always pretty much the managers that does. But perhaps it just isn't an appealing place to be. If you look at it and go, well, they've had this big change in the summer, or when they've got rid of the manager really early on, is there much point in me going, especially a manager that's in work like Lee Bell, who's at a really good place at the minute in terms of a promotion pushing Crew? There's no appeal to move jobs to a place where it doesn't look sustainable, at least on the surface of it. And I think that perhaps is just the problem at Burton, that they're struggling to attract a manager that they want, and they're not aiming higher. I mean, we mentioned Ika Karanka in a job that's only a few places above them in the table.
Yeah.
And they seem, Bristol Rovers, the names in the rumour mill, if you like, seem to be, you're pushing up, you're pulling someone down to League One, whereas Burton are trying to drag someone up to League One, and they're struggling to do that.
Yeah, it's just not happening really for them. So yeah, they're just in an awkward position, as I said. Really, they can't win. Where they are as a team, that I don't know. They're just
It's a holding pattern.
Yeah,
because it's an interim manager. You're not going to put too much stock into it, really, and you sort of, the players have got to be thinking, well, what's going on? There's no security and long-term vision at the minute with an interim manager being in place for so long, and we're only a couple of knocks away from January. Who's in charge of the recruitment in January? Who's in charge of the ins and outs in January if you've got an interim manager in place? And it just seems very confused, and it's a situation that needs sorting really quite sharpish, really, for me.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. I agree with you for that. Surely as a fan as well, it must be quite, I don't know, not confusing, just in a bit no man's land, really. It can't be good for them, really.
Yeah, definitely that. Well, on that note, that'll do us for this episode of the League One Lowdown here on the Deck Podcast Network. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, whatever platform you have done so. Remember to give us a like, a subscribe, a 5-star review if you really enjoyed the podcast that much, or whatever it is you can do on your platform. Obviously, it does help a great deal. And if you're on YouTube, do subscribe. And that will mean you'll be notified on Wednesday night. One final plug on the way out for our live stream, Wednesday, the 18th of December, pre-Christmas. It'd be good fun, as well as it being a quite detailed chat between the four of us about the different aspects and different stories going on in League One at the moment. So do join us for that. And if you don't, have a great Christmas, and we'll see you on the other side of it when we get to the new year. So thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time on the League One Lowdown.